and we'll talk about that in detail a little bit more later. Teacher attitude is very important. Teachers must respect and value all students. Respecting and valuing is not enough if no action is put into place to change their teaching. So they have to have the right attitude, and their teaching styles must change. Link writes that one problem with schools today is that we often have traditional teachers and non-traditional students. Our students are changing, and we must change with them. Gone are the days when teachers could lecture all day while students took notes. Teachers must realize the power of transformative teaching. Quintero spends about 200 pages on how to incorporate critical literacy into early childhood and elementary classrooms. Here are just a few ways to incorporate critical literacy into elementary classrooms. Singing in different languages, reading books about different cultures and people, drawing self-portraits and valuing and talking about the differences, tying personal family stories, histories, and language into new learning contexts, create interactive lessons that encourage students to think and speak in meaningful ways, make reading and writing transformative through problem posing, and integrate critical literacy into all subjects. Here is a very quick example of how you could use critical literacy in your classroom. I found the book Yoko's Paper Cranes about a Japanese girl, who's in the form of a cat, who lives in Japan, and as she turns older, her family moves to America and leaves behind her grandparents in Japan. So, on her grandfather's birthday, Yoko makes paper cranes and sends them back to Japan for her grandfather's birthday. So if you read this with your students, you could discuss Japanese culture. You could have dialogue and question the students about where their birthplaces, where are they from? Have they ever moved in their life? Maybe they moved across the street. Maybe they moved to another state. Or maybe they moved from a different country. You could then talk about who has family and friends that live far away, and what can we do to keep in touch with them? Now you would let your students come up with these answers, but hopefully they would come to the conclusion that they could write letters, draw pictures, send an email as a form of communication. So that would take me into a letter writing unit where we could practice writing letters to family or friends who live far away. In math, we can make paper airplanes or try to make paper cranes. In kindergarten that might be difficult. And we could throw them and we can measure which one went the furthest, which one flew the shortest amount of distance, were they equal? In science, one of our big kindergarten objectives in science is things in the sky. So we could talk about, well, what do we see in the sky in America? Do you think that people in Japan see the same sun? Do they have clouds in Japan? Do they see the moon? That would tie into a great lesson on the things in the sky. And for a field trip, you can even visit the Birmingham Botanical Gardens and visit the Japanese garden section at the gardens. So, now that you kind of know what critical literacy is, and I gave you an example of it, why should we do this? When I heard the term critical literacy, I thought that it sounded like something that high school and possibly middle school age students would deal with. And I was very excited to learn that it is never too early to start teaching students how to read their world and understand the different viewpoints and embrace multicultural ideas like I just shared. And we should do critical literacy because we should practice it because children who are exposed to different cultures, values, and languages learn to respect one another and appreciate their own cultures as well. A culturally supportive environment where children are encouraged to share their ideas leads to children becoming more confident in their own identity. More reasons to implement critical literacy into your classroom. When children develop their own sense of self, they are more likely to respect others' differences. Persons from different backgrounds can provide one another with new ideas or new perspectives. Multiple perspectives on critical literacy. I've touched on this a few times before, but one question is, when can we start teaching critical literacy? And like I just mentioned, when I first heard the term, I thought that's probably for middle school and high school because the term critical and literacy, it sounds pretty challenging. But Wink believes that many 5-year-olds start reading their world before they enter kindergarten. And Quintero seconds Wink's belief when she states that children's worldwide views begin to take place before age 5, and then by kindergarten, their language and learning perspectives are in full swing. Young children gain these perspectives before they even come to knowledge about their students is important. Creighton addresses that teacher discretion and knowledge about their students should come into play in order to determine appropriate levels of understanding and issues presented in critical literacy. So what that really means is that what you're going to do in kindergarten with critical literacy is different than what you would do in secondary class if you were teaching critical literacy. So for a kindergarten example I have is folk tales and storytelling might be used as a way to support critical literacy and show students that these things can enrich personal history. In a secondary example, they might ask the tougher questions such as, what kind of person should I be or become? What kind of social or gender roles in society should I play? Another issue that I found in my research was, well, what about the idea that children are not affected by or able to meaningfully respond to text while they are still learning to read? Just because children are not able to independently read does not mean they are too young for activities such as reading picture books, drawing, journal writing, and storytelling, all of which allow children the opportunity to be engaged with different genres of literature and multicultural ideas. Much evidence has been found in the support of the view that children are strongly influenced by the text they encounter at any age. Even 4-year-olds can make the connections between identity, family, loyalty, and activism on their developmental level of understanding. Critical literacy builds critical thinking skills, and you do not have to be an independent reader in order to think critically. Through critical literacy, teachers are able to help their students develop higher order thinking skills such as understanding, describing, interpreting emotions, relating to and understanding others, relating to and understanding their feelings, their emotions, their abilities, their interests, their reactions, their culture, and many more things. More reasons why critical literacy can be taught in the early grades. Comparing texts from different cultures written on the same issue or theme can be done in the youngest of classrooms, facilitated through teacher read-alouds and discussions. Young children can develop questions, they can pose problems, and they can search for answers, which are all components of critical literacy and that can be done in a whole group setting. It is never too early to start reading books about culture, identity, values, and language. Literature on these topics ultimately leads to respect for all. Children who are involved in a culturally supportive environment where they are encouraged to share their ideas become more confident in their own identity. When children have a strong sense of self, they are more likely to respect the differences of others. So, what have I learned? Conclusions and questions. One of the most valuable things I have learned is it is never too early to start incorporating critical literacy into your classroom. And hopefully by now you've learned this as well. I also learned that critical literacy is not as scary or complicated as it sounds. When you think of it, when you use the word critical with your students, I think a good way to explain it to them is to think about what is really going on in the story. For example, I know a story that we read in my class is Why Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ear. It's quickly about how the sun no longer rises because of the consequences of lying. So, if you're talking to your students about what is really going on and they're thinking critically, they're going to understand that this story is more than just why the sun doesn't rise. It's about the consequences of lying. And of course you would not want to reveal the critical aspects of the story to your students, but you would want to talk through it and question them. And a good way to initiate discussions and problem posing with literature is to use the Socratic dialogue that Wink mentions in her book, Critical Pedagogy. More things I have learned. Our society is changing and teachers must implement practice that really does value children and their families, where their families come from. I also learned that critical literacy can be integrated into all subject areas. And I learned that if you understand critical pedagogy, then you understand critical literacy. Critical pedagogy and critical literacy both involve and believe in problem posing, transformative learning, giving all students a voice, democracy, equality, and impacting the community. Some questions I have when I was doing this project was, why am I just now hearing the term critical literacy? 4 years of undergrad at Auburn, and I'm now finishing up my master's degree and wonder why I've never heard this term before. To me, critical literacy is too much of an important topic to learn about during my last semester of grad school. Another question I had was, why aren't more teachers incorporating critical literacy into their teaching? I believe a good answer for that might be because they are unaware of the term critical literacy and they lack the education to know what that means. So in conclusion, critical literacy stresses the importance of equality and democracy in education through the use of literature. We must teach our students to respect, tolerate, learn from, and appreciate people from different cultures. I think Quintero got it right when she said, all of us have a long way to go to understand the complexities of race, class, gender, and nationality, and how we can learn from each other to live in peace. Critical literacy for children is one hopeful trajectory. Thank you for listening to my video on critical literacy. I hope you learned something.